My name's Laura, an addiction advocate, I guess you could say. Um, I am starting this podcast in hopes of creating a platform to discuss addiction, discuss where it comes from, what causes it, kind of the brain pathways of it, genetic links, as well as like the many, many ways of recovery, um, societal implications, family support. Not only how does family support the person, but also how to support the family of the person, um, and generational trauma that comes from it. This is meant to be a space for just what does that look like, right? Um, and in addition to that, I wanted this to become a platform for those who have lost someone to share that story, um, share who that person was, um, characteristics, personality traits, quirks, fun things, and difficult things about those people that might get missed because they're labeled an addict and we kind of write them off, or society writes them off. I don't want to say we. Um, and I want to open that platform. Um, in addition, I also want to open the platform for those that have struggled through addiction and or currently are struggling through addiction. That's a possibility as well. Because I think once in recovery, we're always in recovery. Um, what their pathway looked like, what brought them to that point, what their recovery looked like, who supported them, what was helpful, what wasn't helpful, just all those things. I think that addiction is so often buried because it's something we don't want to talk about. We're afraid. And I want it to be an open conversation because I know that if it had been an open conversation, not only my sister would still be here, but I think many of the friends and other loved ones that I've lost probably would be too. So, yeah, I'd call myself an advocate because I'm tired of losing people. I'm over it. And I know those who have lost maybe 1 or 10 are over it too. So here we are. We're going to change this. So come with me while we work to make our voices as loud as we can. So I wanted to start, with that all being said, I wanted to start with talking about my sister, since she was probably, not probably, is the inspiration for this whole thing. Like I said, I've lost many, many people over the years. But losing her was the worst day of my life and my greatest fear. And I think once your greatest fear happens, everything changes. That being said, her name was Crystal Jean. She was born on June 14th, 1993. And I'm going to do this as best I can without crying. But those of you that have dealt with grief, no, that's not easy. So we're going to see what we can do. She passed on May 5th of 2022. And she will forever be 28 years old. Very young. The day she was born, I remember very distinctly because I had been asking for a little sister for a long time. Don't ask me why, because she was really annoying. But for some reason, I thought I wanted a little sister. But she was born that day, and I remember waking up, and we were living with my grandmother at the time. And I woke up, and my mom and my stepdad were not there. And I couldn't figure out why. And I was just shy of 3 years old, and so I went upstairs looking for my grandma, and I was like, oh, where are they? And she said they went to the hospital to have your sister, and I was mad. Like, 2-year-old hopping mad because they went without me to have her. And of course, because I had been asking for her, this was supposed to be about me, right? I should have been there. So I was mad. Um, but she was beautiful. She was blonde as blonde could be, man. She was bright blonde, like towhead, as they call it, right? I don't know if that's still an okay term to use, but I'm going to use it for the moment until somebody corrects me. But she, like, white. Her hair was white until she got older. And I used to tease her by calling her things like see-through and clear, just because I didn't want her. And I was Lawa for a long time because she couldn't use her R's. Being born on June 14th, those of you that don't know, is National Flag Day. Some people celebrate it, some people not so much, but a lot of people do put out their flags for that day. And so for the longest time, she thought people were putting out the American flags for her, which I let her believe. Might as well, right? You can't hurt a little kid to believe that. She believed that till she was in her early teens, I think. But we were each other's safe space. We did everything together. I mean, we were kids, but we didn't have much money growing up. We were pretty poor. And so the fun we had, we kind of had to make. And so most of our fun was playing in the mud, which we enjoyed. Like, we were definitely little tomboys, as they called it back then. We would create like mud pies, mud cities, as my mom called it. We would like create. And because we were poor, we lived in some pretty interesting homes, and most of the homes didn't exactly have grass, but like they would have mud, and we would like go in there and we would dig little tracks and towns and cities and build them up into little homes and stuff. It was pretty intricate. Like, we would get creative with it. So we enjoyed that. We'd spend hours doing that. We'd spend hours riding bikes and rollerblading. Bikes was just a huge thing for us. I think in our preteen years, we spent a lot of time rollerblading and listening to NSYNC, Backstreet Boys. That was, I think I just dated myself, but that was a big thing. Outdoors, that was a big thing for us. We were always outside. I don't think we were ever really inside. We had one stepsister that would come spend a lot of time with us. So we played a lot of time with us during the summer. So we spent a lot of time playing like board games like Monopoly. We spent hours playing Monopoly, which is interesting because neither one of us had much of an attention span, but we managed to keep it for Monopoly. A lot of the areas that we grew up in were very industrialized, and so we would go play in like the industrial areas. Sometimes when they were closed down, sometimes not. I remember next to one of the homes we were growing up in, they were in the process of putting in, I think it was like a dog grooming salon or something. And so, they built down the foundation, and so we went out there and we would like jump across the foundation, which, thinking back, not safe, not great, but we did the things. Because these are like 6 foot deep, like holes in the ground with like rebar sticking out. We were jumping across them. It was a miracle we made it to 18 to begin with. But we did the things, right? We enjoyed it. We'd skateboard off roofs. We'd swing from the willow trees. Like, we were daredevils. Like, we were always looking for a dopamine or an adrenaline hit. Like, we were just going crazy. And I think a lot of that was because our life were just so fight or flight all the time, because we were poor and we did deal with a lot of trauma. There was a lot of abuse emotionally and physically. And I think that, when you are dealing with so much bad, I think you'll do anything to just get good somewhere. And so, and I'll talk about this later when I do some episodes on addiction and how the stress hormones and the the good hormones kind of work together and whatnot. But um, when you're so stressed out, little tiny hits of joy, like just playing with dolls, just isn't enough, right? You need like a serious adrenaline hit to even hit that meter of joy. And so like we did some pretty crazy shit to get that adrenaline joy hit. Like we did some crazy shit. Um, I mean, looking back, we had a crazy childhood. It was fun. That was fun. I mean, our overall childhood when we were home, not great, not great. Um, I learned to cook when I was about 4 years old because if they didn't, we didn't eat. Because my mom was usually working 2 or 3 jobs, and her dad, who I thought was my dad, but that's a story for another time, didn't cook, didn't care. So the only way that we ate was if I cooked. And I did that for her because I would have done literally anything for her. Anything. And I did. I did anything for her. It was a lot of neglect, a lot of trauma. As we got older, my mom divorced that. My go-to is gentleman, but that's not the word I want to use. I want to use other words. That person, and married another one who was no better. And he came with a couple of other kids. One of them was the stepsister that I talk about that we played Monopoly with, who I still very much adore. And we are very close with still. I consider her daughters my nieces. But also came with some not so great stepbrothers who were very inappropriate with myself and her, which is another form of trauma that really wasn't dealt with. And both those men, her dad and the stepdad, both also suffered from some pretty serious substance use issues, alcohol being the most present. Some serious alcohol use from the stepdad. That was very clear. From her dad, alcohol and the physical effects you can see of other substance use. Never confirmed, but you can see it. And I think that has its own part, right? And I'll talk about this again later on, but seeing other people deal with their own pain through substances teaches you that that's the best way to do it. And I think we saw some addiction from my mom too, through food and other things. We constantly watched her struggle with her weight, kind of fluctuating up and down, and always talking about her weight, which was normal back then, right? I think every woman did. And still to this day, it's still pretty normalized. And I think society's trying to go the other direction, but it was still struggle. But I think my mom ate her feelings a lot. And that's probably one of my own addictions is food. Because when I'm sad, I eat. When I'm happy, I eat. When I'm bored, I eat. And that was my addiction. And I'll be honest, still is. But we learn from the people that we watch. Pretty early on in her teen years, because she had seen it so often, not realizing that these were addictions, right? She started doing the same thing. It's easy to get access to. I don't want to scare parents, but that's the facts. It's easy to get access to. I don't care what school you're in. I don't care what neighborhood you live in. I don't care what part of the country or world you live in. These things, if you want them, you'll find them, right? If you want pot, you'll find it. If you want alcohol, you'll find it. If you want pills, you'll find it. It's not hard. And I guess going back to the whole we didn't talk about it, right? In my family, mental health wasn't a thing. It's not that it wasn't there. Mental illness was there. It is there. mental illness is definitely there. And addiction is definitely there. It wasn't talked about because they didn't understand it and they didn't see it and they didn't get it, right? My family is definitely old school, right? Pull yourself up by your bootstraps, do the thing, right? Like depression doesn't exist. Anxiety is just in your head, right? It is in your head, but like, just in your head. PTSD, right? That's for soldiers in the war, right? And don't misunderstand. I don't think that most of my family did this out of any form of trying to hurt us. It just wasn't understood. They didn't know that it was a thing. It wasn't something that their parents knew or their parents knew. It just wasn't present in my family dynamic. It wasn't understood in my family dynamic. When someone was sad, it was just like, oh, you'll be fine. It's okay. Get through it. Push through it. It'll be fine. If someone was anxious, it was just, well, probably you had too much caffeine, right? It was, if someone went through trauma, that's part of life, right? Divorce happens, just get through it. Addiction wasn't a thing. It was just like, well, I'm drinking. It is what it is. I think for the most part, most of my family had no bad intentions to that. It just wasn't there. It wasn't understood. Um, and now they're starting to understand. They see it. Even when I first stepped into the field, they didn't understand it. They're starting to. It's getting there. But because of that, right, we were not prepared for what was going to happen. We were not warned. We were not ready for things to get much, much worse. The bright side to that is, right, like we didn't know about addiction, but also most of my family, all they'd really come in contact with was like the basic things, right, like pot and alcohol, and maybe some psychedelics, some ecstasy, and some of that shit here and there in the 70s. But they hadn't really come in contact with the harder shit until an uncle who I know did, uh, and some other pieces, right, and my sister. Yeah, things have gotten so much worse over the last couple of decades. It's insane. I have clients who have been using substances for decades, 60 years plus, who have like, I have to get out now because things are so much worse. It's worse now than it ever was. Anyway, from that sidestep. Anyway, like I said, we weren't prepared. She wasn't prepared. All she saw was people drinking their feelings, right? Which we didn't translate to that's addiction. We didn't translate to what does that mean later on? What does drinking your feelings mean? Like what is that going to mean? She didn't know that if I tried pot at 12, that's going to open up a door for so much worse. She didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what that meant. Fucking 16 when I got the call that she was fucking drunk at some friend's house. I didn't know what that meant. I just thought she was being a regular teen. I didn't know what that meant. None of us did. We didn't know what to be prepared for. But again, when you are dealing with so much pain from so many things in your life, you will find any way to find some kind of joy or to numb it. And I think riding skateboards off a roof goes out the window when you're 12. At that point, you've got the hormones kicking in and you got so much more going on. At that point, it's not just joy you're looking for. It's, I just want to not feel, and I will do anything not to feel this. And that's when you turn to pot. That's when you turn to cocaine and crack and heroin and whatever the fuck else you can find that is just going to make it so you don't have to feel it. She also turned to sex. That was a big thing too. First time she told me she had sex, I was like, the fuck? I won't share that story, but God help us all. That should have been a wake-up call for me, but again, I didn't know. Looking back, hindsight's 2020, right? And then she started jumping from unhealthy relationship to unhealthy relationship because, again, we repeat patterns. We do. We repeat patterns. And all she'd seen was unhealthy relationships. So she started going for guys that were not great. And she had daddy issues because once her dad decided he didn't want to be a dad when she was like 10 years old, he just disappeared into fucking the cosmos, and she had no dad to teach her what that meant as a teenager. We had great uncles. Sorry, we had uncles that were awesome. We had a grandfather who, bless his soul, is the most amazing man I'll ever know. And that helps, but it doesn't completely fill the void. So you try and find somebody that does. And unfortunately, some of these little boys know what they're looking for. Yeah. So she hopped from one unhealthy relationship to another. She drank a lot, smoked a lot of pot, did a lot of other things. Had a lot of sex. She was doing everything she could to either not feel or to feel something that wasn't pain. And then she got with a guy, called him T. I'll just go with that for now. Who used her a lot. And that was one of the reasons why she got into stripping, was because he knew, she's a pretty girl. She's size 0, tall, blonde, beautiful eyes. She had the body for it. She could make a lot of money. So he used her to make a lot of money. And their relationship was not healthy by any means. But at one point, when she was, and I always mix up the time frame for this, because it was a difficult time for me too. And so my life was kind of in upheaval as well. I had my youngest son when I was 19, right out of high school. Married my high school sweetheart, because I was pressured into it. Because at the time we were LDS, which was my chance at looking for some kind of stability, to do the right thing. That marriage lasted all of 2 years. It wasn't a very healthy relationship. Thank God now he and I have both healed and are good friends. And we parent our son in a very wonderful way. But my life was in complete upheaval during that time frame. Over the course of that 2 to 3 years, my life was it was crazy. And so I mix up that timeline for her, because my life is hard. But somewhere in that space of time, when my son was about 1.5 years, 2 years, she got in a car accident. Somebody rear-ended her boyfriend's Mustang with them in it. It was a pretty good car accident. She ended up with a really nasty whiplash, like a lot of pain, just a lot of pain. And being 10 or so years ago, they handed her a bottle of opiates. And she took them. We didn't know what that meant. I'll say that a lot. We didn't know what that meant. And she started taking them. Um, and of course, because she already had that addiction gene and she was already pretty tolerant of most things, um, it didn't take long for her to build up a tolerance for this. Uh, one pill every 6 hours turned to two and three and four. Um, and then she was going back again and again and again and getting more. Um, I think at one point, I think I counted how many she was taking, and she was taking the highest dose pill. She was taking about 8 every 2 or so hours. That's a lot in your system. That's a lot. She would get these awful, awful cysts all over her body because your body's not meant to have that. Like, her body was rejecting that shit. He was pissed. And I tell my clients this all the time when you go through, like, and I'll talk about pause later on, but when you go through what they call post-acute withdrawal syndrome, the time that it takes for your body to go back to normal, uh, it's because your body is pissed the fuck off because you fucked with it. If it is mad, it's bad. Like her body was rejecting it so hard, but she just kept taking it because she was hooked. And I think the boyfriend, enjoyed that too because he could control her even more. Um, and again, this timeline is so funky for me because I also ended up in a really rough rebound relationship during that time too, which was not great. But and so that timeline throws me off as well. Um, but eventually, she kind of caught on to what he was doing and the unhealthiness of that relationship. So she split with him. Um, and then at that time, she was working at a home improvement store with my mom, and she met her husband. And 3 weeks or 3 months, they weren't dating for very long. It's three. Um, and it was about 3 months, and then they got married. They moved in together, got married. Like, it was a very short, and like, part of me wants to judge it, but I can't because, like, a relationship has its timeline, right? Some are shorter, some are longer. You can't really judge. Um, and she always wanted to be a mom. Like, that was her thing. She always wanted to be a mom. And I think a lot of that is because she wanted to redo our childhood, right? She wanted it to be different. Um, and she was still using. She was pregnant with my niece. And she continued to use the opiates. And because she was a size 0, right? That caused its own problems. And so her body just couldn't keep up with trying to take care of her and my niece and keep up with this drug use. So she ended up having several surgeries. She actually ended up having an appendectomy, which is where they remove your appendix, and having her gallbladder removed while she was pregnant. Just because her body was just shutting down. It wasn't good. And then she ended up having the baby early. I want to say 34 weeks. She's so tiny. She was so tiny. She was healthy, but she was so tiny. Uh, excuse me. But she was adorable. She was like she looked like a doll. She was a perfect little baby. She was so cute. Um, Mom sass from the day one, man. Mom sass from day one. Um, I think she recognized that this was an addiction portion, right? And that she could, I don't know if she wants to say could. Well, could. Yeah, that she could maybe fix it, right? And that she should. I don't know if she said could, but she should, right? Like, she's recognizing this is not great, this is not good. Um, and that this was unhealthy. Well, okay, let's fix that. I don't know if she knew that she could or should, that she should fix it, but I think she knew that it was unhealthy, right? Um, Not in her head, but I think that based on my observations of her, I think that was probably the best way to describe it. She knew that it was that this was unhealthy. Because it was about then that she really did try to get clean. She would go through times where she would detox, but it didn't ever last for a long time. She would say that it did, but I could tell it didn't. I wanted to believe it, but looking back, I know that it didn't. Um, and unfortunately, during a lot of this time, I enabled her. I thought I was helping, but I wasn't. I was enabling. She would ask for money, I would give it. She'd ask for a ride to the doctor, I would do it. Um, she'd say, and she'd use the term like and once the baby was born, she knew that was like that was like my Achilles heel, right? Like, oh, the baby needs diapers. All right, here's money, right? Oh, the baby doesn't have food. Okay, here's money, right? Until I got smart. And then I was like, oh, the baby needs diapers. Cool. What size, right? Like, I got smart after a while. I did. Oh, you need gas for your car? Cool. Meet me at Maverick, right? Like, I got smart. But for a long time, I did enable her. Um, and she did. She tried for a while. And then she got pregnant with my nephew. And again, her body started to shut down. It was hard. Like, her body really shut down. The fact that she made it through that pregnancy and both she and my nephew survived, I think, is just a testament to miracles, honestly. But during that whole time, again, she knew she was unhealthy. She knew that she needed help, and she knew that she needed to get off of these things. And at that point, she had transitioned from opiates to an anxiety medication called gabapentin. Um, and that one she had started abusing as well. And I think that was a doctor had put her on that in hopes that it would be an anti-anxiety medication that would help her. But unfortunately, she just ended up abusing that as well. And that was the medication she was mostly on with my nephew. And I think that's partially why she survived that pregnancy, was because the opiates weren't as, because the anxiety medication wasn't as bad as the opiates were, right? It wasn't as strong. And it didn't cause as much damage to her body as quickly. But she was still taking like a lot more than she ever should have, right? Like, it was insane. Um, and at that point, again, she started asking for help. And she started uh, increasingly doctor shopping, right? So she was going to doctor after doctor after doctor, trying to find somebody who would prescribe her these meds, because at some point her doctor stopped prescribing them, and then she couldn't find another doctor that would prescribe them, and she couldn't find another doctor that would prescribe them. It was just a constant struggle. And then at some point she did start showing, and so these doctors started catching on, and that made things more difficult. So she came to me asking me for help. And I said, I'll help you. And again, some of this was help, some of it's enabling, right? And I took her to the doctor's office and I talked to them. And at this point, I had started working within the field because I wanted to help and I needed to understand how. I wasn't a mental health therapist at the time. I was support staff positions within like youth treatment centers, things like that. So I understood it kind of, but not enough to know what the difference was yet. And so I kept kind of going with her to doctor's offices, and I would hold on to pills, right? And then she would, and help her taper down. And then she would end up asking for more. And I didn't know how to tell her no, because she's my baby sister and I wanted to help her, which is hard. And towards the end of the pregnancy, there was an incident where I think she went to the hospital looking for meds, and her husband had taken her. And because they wouldn't give her meds, she threatened suicide, which I don't know why they let her out of the hospital when she threatened. I think she left and then she threatened it. I don't exactly understand this scenario because I got multiple different stories from her and her husband and never really understood the full story to what led up to this. But I remember getting the phone call from her husband, and I was on my way to work. At the time I was serving. And I was a waitress. Sorry, for those of you that don't know what that means. I was a waitress and I was headed to work, and I got a call from her husband, and he's like, this is what she's saying. She's, and I think she was at that point, she's like 32 weeks. And he's like, she's threatening to kill herself, and she's starting to take the baby with her. Like, and by that, I mean, like, my niece, and she was just, and those of you that know, who've been in addiction or who have had family in addiction, know they're not themselves when they're like that. And I want to be very open and transparent about this situation, because I want to be clear. This was not her, and these are not things she would have ever said or threatened had it been her. And I think sometimes we label an addict based on their worst behavior in that moment, and that's not them. The using person is completely different than the actual person. But she was threatening to kill herself and to take the baby with her. And the fear in his voice, I immediately said, I'm on my way. What hospital are you at? Called my work and said, I'm not going to be there. I'm sorry, I'm just not going to be there. which is hard for me. I wasn't very good at that at the time. Now I've learned to just like, if I miss work, I miss work, right? Family comes first. But set up at the hospital, and I said, you send her back in. I don't care if you take security. I don't care what you do. You do not let her leave that hospital parking lot. And I think he called security and got her back in there. And we got her back into the hospital room. And I stayed there while they stabilized her. And she said the most awful things to me that night. Things that I know in her stable, sober, right mind never, ever, ever would have said to me. Because we were each other's safe space. Like, we were each other's punching bag, don't get me wrong, because we knew we were each other's safe space, right? But she never would have said those things to me. And a lot of that was because she wanted me to leave. She wanted me gone because she knew with me there, I knew her better than anyone else on this planet. And that with me there, she wasn't going to get what she wanted. And I was going to fight tooth and nail to protect her. And I think part of that suicidal thought was that, like, she was done with this fight. She was done being numb, but she was done trying to get clean, and she was done. And she knew with me there, I wasn't going to give up. And she wanted me gone so that she could give up. And so she was going to say whatever it took to get me out of that room, and it never worked. I stayed there until they stabilized her and they released her. But I don't know if it was neighbors or if it was the hospital. I don't know. But somebody called DCFS because of it, right? And I think it was probably because she threatened the baby. But DCFS showed up at her door the next day, told her they'd be watching her for like the next month. And that was kind of her, I would say probably her rock bottom, her wake up call. And she dropped all the meds that day. Well, at least those meds. I never want to say that she was completely clean and sober because I don't think she was. I think she was stable. And then she white knuckled it for a while after that. She was her for a long time. She wasn't going to let her babies get taken away. And once she woke back up, that light turned back on for her. Decisions were made, right? And she stayed that way for a long time. And then I want to say it's probably about the fall of, and she was her. Like, when, let's go back. Okay, she was her for a long time. And by her, I mean, God, if I could be her as a mom, like, that is my role model for a mom, man. She was like, if she was still here and she could be a mom, man, I think if she could have gotten past all that, like, she would have been the most amazing mom. She was that mom that would get on the floor with them and paint things. She didn't care if the house was a mess because the kids had fun. She would bake and cook with them and do Nerf gun fights and creative things. And she would come up with things to build in the backyard for them to do. And she was always wanting to take them places and would find some other activity to do. Like, here's this cool, Easter egg hunt. And like, I'm such a homebody. And half the things that I did with my kids when she was around was because of her. She's like, let's take them swimming. Let's go here. Let's go to this Easter egg hunt. Let's go get ice cream. Let's go. Like, she was just always wanting to do stuff with the kids, right? And a lot of that was because she was trying to make up for our childhood, but fuck it, right? Her kids loved it. They were always having a blast. They always had something fun. And camping was a blast because she was always all about it, man. Like, let's paint the rocks, let's do the things, let's play this game, let's play that game, let's, some activity. She was always all about it, right? When she was her, like, she was a blast. She was fun. But she was white knuckling it. For those of you that don't know, it's when you're scared out of your freaking mind and you are gripping the steering wheel, hoping to God you don't die. And she was. I mean, she was down half bottle NyQuil every night to sleep. And anytime we went out drinking, man, she drank. She drank. When most of us were having a drink or two, man, she was, yeah. And I don't know when she started to slip. I want to say it was about the fall of 2019. And that was about when my life fell apart again. Well, not the fall of 2019, but it was around then. My rebound relationship that turned into a marriage that shouldn't have had fallen apart. And I ended up in the basement half of her duplex that she was living in. And I could see her slipping. She'd struggled. And backing up, I mean, during that time when she was her, she helped me through, I can't even describe so many things. Like, she helped raise my oldest son. He was so close to her. And then when I, uh, when I went to work at support staff, I loved it. And I decided I fell in love with the work again. Total addiction advocate. Decided to go back to get my master's degree for mental health counseling. And while I was doing that, it was a full-time in-person 4 days a week program. She watched my kids. She watched my 2 younger ones for me, which was awesome. So she did that for me. I was to the end of my program in 2019 when I moved in with her. And she helped out with them when I was doing my internship, which turned into a full-time position. She's helping with that. But I could see she was starting to slip. Her attitude, her demeanor just wasn't the same. I don't know if she started to use, I think it was just her demons were coming back. A lot of her trauma that had never gotten dealt with. Because she never went to, like, she put the drugs down, right? But she never went to any kind of counseling. She never went to any kind of NAA meeting. She never dealt with any of it. Which, I mean, everybody has a million different roads to recovery, right? But if you've got trauma underneath all that, you've got to deal with it somehow. I don't care if that's through self-help books and doing it yourself, going to counseling, going to AA groups. I don't care what it is. You have to deal with it somehow. And she never did. She just buried them again. And eventually they came back up. And I think that was part of it. They were starting to rear their heads again. She just couldn't bury them anymore. And by about the spring of 2020, I think is when she started drinking again. You could see it. It was there. And the drugs, it wasn't drugs this time. It was drinking that she started with. I think it's because it was acceptable. Because it's legal, right? It's acceptable. I wasn't something she had to go doctor shopping for. And so she did that. She started drinking like crazy. And I moved out the summer of 2020 to move in with my current husband. Or to create our beautiful blended family that we have now. She was mad. She was really mad at me. Which I don't know. Some part of me hopes that if in her right mind, it would have been different. I don't know. And there came a point where it was over the course of that fall that she and I just kind of had a falling out. We just weren't really talking much, which was odd for us. And we'd had our ups and downs over time, but it just like we just weren't close. Okay, I don't want to say close. We were still close. Like we were still each other's person, but it was more of like we were just struggling. I was trying to get my life back on track, and I think she was faltering, and I think she was afraid I was going to walk away, and I wasn't, and I had told her that. But then that winter, when I moved out, one of our younger sisters moved in, and she had a falling out with her at one point and kicked her out. She was pregnant, kicked her out right before Christmas, and she threw her out in the winter in the cold because she was drinking and got mad at her about something and kicked her out. And there's more to that story. I'm sure there is, right? I don't know what was going on and all of that, but that was enough to kind of set our whole family on edge. And it was really a realization of like, there's something going on with you and you need to figure it out, right? Like, you're not a safe person to have around everybody. This drinking has gotten to a point where you are not safe. And I think it was sometime around that spring that I finally ended up telling her, like, I love you, but I need space. Like, I'll be here for you, but I can't allow you around my kids. Oh, it was that spring because I remember we had my niece's birthday party in March. And I took my oldest son to it. and she was drinking a lot, like a lot. And when she drinks, she thinks she's fun. She's not fun. She's not fun. She's not fun. She ends up being kind of annoying. Not kind of annoying, really annoying. Um, she gets very grabby, very aggressive in her kind of like playfulness. It's annoying. And she got like that way with my son, and he was like, "I don't like this, Mom. I don't want to be around her again." And at the time, he was like 10 or 11, and he didn't want to be around her. He's like, I can't be around her again. I don't like that." And so at that point, I made the decision that my family, my kids at least, wouldn't be around her for a while. Um, and it was a hard decision because I knew how close my kids were with her and how much they enjoyed her company and how much she enjoyed being around them. She loved being an aunt. But I also, growing up around that, I couldn't expose my kids to that anymore. I couldn't do it. So I made decisions. I told her I was here for her, and if she needed anything, please tell me. But I can't do this anymore. I can't let my kids around you. I saw her one more time in July of 21 when one of our sisters came up from her dad, from Arizona to see us, and we went out for a night. And then we talked a couple more times that fall. She asked for resources because they had been fighting, and the drinking got worse to the point where it turned into a couple of domestic violence charges, which led to her being forced to treatment. I gave her the resources that I had. And again, nothing really was done with that. And then the last I actually heard from her was on my son's birthday in April. She reached out to me. She said, "I don't know if you have me blocked, but I just wanted to tell him happy birthday. Could you please tell him?" And I said, "Of course." And then I got that call on May 5th. And that call lasted 1 minute and 7 seconds. And it was her husband, and it was 6:25 in the morning. And it said, and all he said was, "This is the call." Because he knew that was a call that I was dreading. And I said, "Are you sure? Did you call an ambulance? Have you checked?" And he said, "Yeah, the cops are here now." And I don't even remember what else I said, other than I think I'm on my way. I hung up the phone and I walked upstairs and I let out a scream that no human, it wasn't human. It wasn't human. And I don't think my husband will ever unhear that sound. I cried so hard I threw up. And then I somehow found composure enough to put clothes on and begged him to please make the phone call to my mother, who was in Florida, because I couldn't do it. And the rest of that day fluctuates between, I'd say probably the next week fluctuates between being very, very clear and vivid and a complete blur. Very vividly remember calling my other sister to tell her. I remember walking into the home. I remember asking to see her, not being able to touch her. The rest of that day is kind of a blur. I remember planning a funeral. I don't really remember who I saw that day. I remember very vividly, I remember one friend being there. A high school best friend that was there. And I remember walking out of the viewing room and she was standing there and my knees buckled. And I hope she knows how much that meant to me that she was there. I think she does, but I don't know if she does. I remember just going through the next couple days and wondering if I'm going to make it. She, and I very, very vividly remember, and I don't even remember who it was, I just remember somebody saying, because whenever you lose somebody, they always ask how'd they die, right? And one of the first things I did was ask for an autopsy report, and I think I always knew what it was going to be, but I wanted to know. And it was an overdose of many, many different medications in your body. But somebody said, and when I said overdose, somebody said, well, that means they were an addict, right? And I said, well, she had addiction issues. And he said, well, if they were an addict, it shouldn't hurt that bad, right? That means they weren't a good person. And I am not by nature aggressive person. I can be if necessary, but I'm not by nature. And it took everything I had not to punch them in the nose, because I wanted to punch them in the nose. Because I was like, if you saw their funeral, right? Like, I don't remember seeing everybody, but I remember it was full. That church was full. And my cousin, I think, said it best when she said she had a way of turning friends into family and strangers into friends. She loved everybody with a fierceness, man. She adored people. She cared. She'd give you the shirt off her back without question. I remember some boy hurt one of our sisters at some point, and all she knew was that he worked at a Smith's nearby. She went to 5 different Smiths to find this boy to tell him off. Right? Like, this is a story my family talks about quite a bit. Right? She'd do anything to protect her family, and she loved you. And once she loved you, she didn't let go. She cared. She was funny. She was sarcastic. She was bitchy as hell. She was beautiful. She was smart. God, she was smart. She didn't believe it, but she was. She was not nothing. She was everything to a lot of people. And when we lost her, she left a hole in a lot of people's lives that we'll never be able to feel. I spent the last year and a half trying to figure out how to live without her. And I don't think I ever will. I have a strong belief that she's here, that she's with me, but it doesn't change it. And there's a lot of us that live with guilt, and I think that's something that a lot of us, those that have lost somebody, live with, right? I made the choice to step back. If I was still there, would it have made a difference? Or would I have just resented her more because of all the things that she said and did? My cousin moved in after my sister moved out. My niece found her the night before. She wouldn't wake up. My cousin got her to wake up and put her back in bed, and it was something we'd all done a million times before, right? And I'm sure a lot of us have done with a lot of our loved ones, like, oh, they're fine, we'll put them back to bed. We made those decisions. My strong belief is that because she was woken up, she was pissed off and decided to take more meds so she could go back to sleep. And that was just what pushed her over the edge. Which none of that is my cousin's fault. None of that is my niece's fault. The only person at fault is my sister for making those decisions. And that's something that, for my own sake, in my own guilt, right, I've had to come to terms with, right? I have those moments of, oh yeah, I know I didn't do anything wrong, right? But what did, like, I do this every day with clients. How come I can save a client, but I can't save my own sister, right? And we have those moments. And I think that being able to take a step back and realize the only one at fault here is her. A lot of people caused her trauma, but she was the one that was responsible for healing from it. A lot of doctors gave her meds when they shouldn't have, but she was the one responsible for asking for it. She was the one who ultimately made the decision to put those things in her body. She was the one who ultimately made the decision not to go to treatment, not to get help, not to make a different choice. Guilt is a big part of it, and I think we all deal with that. And I think this is something else I want this platform to be, is a place for people to grieve, to recognize it's not my fault. I want the younger people in my family to know that it's okay. And I want, if this does nothing else, I want my kids, my nieces, my nephews, who want them to know that this exists. And that it is possible to happen and it's possible to recover from it. I don't want them to blindly walk into it like we did. I won't let them. So that's my story, or one of them. I'm debating whether or not I want to tell some of the other ones, but that's my main story. This is a family addiction because it becomes a tradition to hide these things, to not recognize these things, to pretend they don't exist, and to pass that down. Let's talk about it. Let's tell our stories. Let's change those traditions. Tell me your story.